Next up, we've got UConn and Maryland. CMAC will be back in a moment, but we move on. UConn, Maryland. We've got Maryland 20.5-point home favorites, 45 the total in this game. Lots of under money in this game, and you can kind of understand why. Let's start with Maryland. Little Tua's gone. Tua Tagovailoa's little brother, Talia Tagovailoa, no longer there. So they're starting over at the quarterback position. And you're talking about a guy that was probably one of the better quarterbacks Maryland's had, in quite some time. We're going to be down to Billy Edwards Jr. and MJ Morris as the starting quarterback. I believe they've already given the job to MJ Morris. And I'll tell you what, right now, I saw him last year at NC State. I talked about this with Philip Nelson, former pro and college quarterback, who was joining me on my other Football Frenzy show to talk NFL and college football this season. So make sure you check that out as well. But we talked about MJ, and he lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. He goes to some NC State games, and he agreed with me about MJ Morris. There's nothing really to like. He was not very accurate consistently. 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions last year. I'm going to need to see it before I believe it from MJ Morris. The NC State transfer is assuming he's the starting quarterback here for Maryland in week 1, which I believe he will be. There's nobody back on the offensive line, not a single returning starter back on that offensive line, which is a concern. Ty Felton is back at receiver, and he's a pretty good one. Roman Hemby at running back. But again, you've got a quarterback that I do not trust yet, and nobody back as far as the offensive line. So there's no continuity to speak of. You're going to see new faces all along that O-line across the board. The defense was the group that actually took a step forward last year for Maryland. A Maryland defense that wasn't always great, but they definitely made improvements last year. 23.8 points per game. They have 3 starters back on the D-line. Defense actually for the first time in years could be better than the offense for Maryland coming into this season. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Sorry, I didn't change the marquee. There we go, UConn, Maryland. So I understand why from a Maryland standpoint, there's been some money on the under here in this game. And when you look at UConn on the flip side, this is still a team that I think when you look at UConn, their offense is still, hit or miss, I guess is the best way to put it. Be interesting to see how they fare here this year. Nick Evers at the quarterback spot. We'll see how he goes. The Wisconsin transfer is going to be the starter this year for UConn. We'll see how that. Actually, you know what? He was expected to start, but don't know if that's fully the case because he was battling with Joseph Fagnano, and this is a guy that played last year for UConn. So keep an eye on this. I don't know if we've got a clear cut.
Like a three-man thing going here?
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of seeing here. Yeah, that's what I'm kind of seeing here. But I know they expected Nick Evers to get the job, but it's not totally set in stone yet. I don't think Jim Moore Jr. is fully decided. What I can tell you is Cam Edwards and Victor Rosa, 2 very good running backs, return for UConn. Brett Buckman returns at receiver. They bring in some transfer portal additions at receiver. 2 starters on the O-line back. Defense was what had their issue last year for UConn, but 5 starters are back. They do have their top tackler back, which is important as well. So the defense should take a step forward. It's just what are you going to get quarterback-wise, regardless of who starts here for UConn? That's going to be the question. Bottom line is Maryland's starting over on offense, and they got to show they can put up points, and I'm not trusting them as a 20.5-point favorite to do that. So UConn's taking the money, under's taking the money. Hard for me to disagree with either position. I think this is a lot of points to be asking a totally rebuilt Maryland offense. Even though their defense could be pretty solid, that's a lot of points to be laying in week 1 with a totally rebuilding Maryland offense and a quarterback that I flat out do not trust in MJ Morris because he was just not something that ever impressed me last year at NC State. So I agree with the move to UConn. I agree with the move to the under in this game. CMAC, what do you think here? UConn, Maryland.
Yeah, there's not a ton to be impressed with. And it's always tough for me in these, like not kind of knowing when there's like a 3-man competition. They're like going into the game, first game, we don't know. Yep. You know what I mean? But I think there's value here with UConn. Finally Maryland, listening a ton. The offensive line, some of their weapons. Obviously, Baby Tua seems like he was there forever. Isn't. And for the most part, I think Morris does win the job, the NC State transfer. I think the other one is Edwards. Did you hit on? But I think Morris probably is the starter. Is that official?
Yeah, it is. I think it's going to be
okay.
Morris. Yep.
Yeah, and I don't know how much I buy that Maryland defense. It looked all right at times. This was one of the teams that you got to look, can the turnovers happen again?
Yeah.
24 turnovers, very opportunistic defense. There's a few others I want to hit in the games that we got that maybe they were more of a bend but don't break and got big plays. That sometimes doesn't always happen when you're not the most talented and stout team. And Maryland, even though I think they stepped up a little bit, I still think there's flaws with this defense. So I don't know if they score a ton. I think, 3 touchdowns here, UConn.